Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Dan Bradbury podcast, and we're continuing in our business value maximization series. We've got several key little nuggets for you in this episode. First up, which is part 4 in the BVM series, check back on the podcast feed for the previous episodes, but we're starting about how I did financial analysis for a client and I discovered this one little thing that nearly bankrupted me, brought the company to its knees. And a lot of business owners think this is their biggest asset, but it wasn't. And by a little bit of analysis and a couple of risk mitigation strategies, I was able to determine what needed to be done to fix the problem and get it back to profit. So with that said, let's go to part 4. Case study number 2, okay? Because of the legal nature of this, I'm going to have to change some names in this story, but this is an absolutely true story. So this is about a guy called Mike, or we'll call Mike for this. And Mike came on board and we did a bit of financial analysis on Mike's business, okay? So Mike had a business that was doing 2 million revenue, and I've rounded it to make the maths easy. He was doing 200,000 in profit. Okay, he'd been growing, but revenues weirdly were growing faster than the profits were growing. But he'd been growing over the last few years. But if he's got 2 million in revenue and 200,000 in profit, what were his total expenses? 1.8 million. But the thing about Mike's business is it really had 2 separate product lines. And I'll be vaguely ambiguous. So let's describe it as just engineering, okay? As it relates to construction. So he had business A, which was renting out engineers to people that needed them, okay? And he had business B, which was actually doing the construction projects himself. So in business A, which was the original business, people would go around and they put together these construction projects, and then they need engineers for various elements of it, and then they would go and hire people from Mike, and Mike would rent them out on a cost plus basis and make money. Okay? Business B went, hold on, these general contractors are making killings on these construction projects. Why don't we start bidding for some of these? And then we get to make the money on the engineers, but we get to make money on the whole project. This was his great idea. Okay, and I forced him to kind of break it out. It was one limited company, but I forced him to break it out and apportion the costs appropriately. And he went, well, I don't get numbers, that's for accountants. I just want to sell more, revenue's growing. I said, well, what's your plan, Mike? He said, well, I want to grow this to 5 million revenue. I said, why? He said, well, if I get 5 million revenue, I think I'll make $1 million in profit. I said, well, why do you want to do that? He said, well, because then I can sell the business on a 5 times multiple, so I'll get 5 million in cash. I said, well, why do you want 5 million in cash? Beyond the obvious, what's the driver behind it is what I was pushing for. And he said, well, I want to spend more time with my kids, and if I've got 5 million in cash invested at 5%, it equals 250 grand a year. And I don't have to work. I went, okay, interesting. So I said, right, well, let's do some analysis. Because I think that prescription, deciding what to do, Tom, without proper diagnosis, is malpractice, and we do it all the time. We just go, oh, I've got a great idea, let's do this. When is it the real problem? When we broke it out, ironically, it was almost exactly half and half. So half his revenue came from stream A, product or service A. Okay. By the way, show of hands, how many in here have more than one product or service? So you've got different revenue channels. Okay, all right. So this might be an interesting exercise, and roughly half of it was product or service B. Now, there were COGS, cost of goods sold, that was easily split out, but there was all this overhead. Most of this stuff was overhead and people cost. I said, Roy, so like, which person does this, who does Joe primarily spend their time on, A or B? And some people, he had staff members that were on A, some were on B, but some of you go, well, I don't know, it's both. And I said, well, I'm willing to bet that they're not exactly spending 50% of their time on both. So let's figure out how they're spending their time and apportion all the costs. You've got office space, okay? But are all your staff to split it 50-50 might be unwise. What's the practical use? And it turned out, 4/5 of the office was for B, not for A. So we apportioned all these costs. So to speed this up, A, and I'm rounding these numbers approximately, had 600,000 in costs, and B had 1.2 million in costs, right? 1.2 plus 600 equals 1.8, which means that you know now that he was making 400,000 in A and he was losing 200,000 in B. Right?
The dream didn't work.
That's exactly the point, Mark. The dream didn't work. And now if you add to it, he was working about 60 hours a week. I said, okay, where's your time being spent? Where do you think? He was spending about 15 hours here, and he was spending about 45 hours here. I said, what's your biggest stress at the moment? He said, I'm being sued. There was 2 or 3 lawsuits going on, which if you're in construction, it's not uncommon, especially general contractors, and you sue the subs and they sue you, and but he said, I've got these big legal issues going on. What do they relate to, A or B? They were all relating to B. So, first point, or first distinction, where's the hidden asset? The hidden asset was A. That was the leverage, and if we just cut out B altogether, he's got a lot more. He's got a lot more than he needs anyway. And the irony was, he was working 15 hours a week, which was overseeing the manager that he hired to put into A, so he could go off and do B. Right? Now, corollary to this story is there was 2 owners in this business, and because of the nature of it, I've got to be a little bit ambiguous. So he was doing less revenue, a hell of a lot more profit. However, in this process, there was 2 business owners that were 50-50 shareholders. Okay? 50-50 shareholders. And let's call him Mike and Steve. So all of a sudden, they had loads of money. So they decided to treat the company on a trip away to, I want to say it was Marbella. It was somewhere, it was a place in my mind where you would not want to go. But maybe that's just me being old and boring. So he took all the staff over to Marbella. And while they're away, it turns out that Steve got involved in some very naughty behaviour, which involved young female members of the team and involved drugs. Okay? So Mike finds out about this and understandably goes apeshit. I mean, that's a technical term. Right? So he loses it and he goes, okay, so now they've got to get a business divorce. He says, I can't work with you anymore. And here's a risk that would destroy most businesses. By good luck, not good luck, I just don't want it to sound too self-serving. One of the first things when I started working with them, I said, what's your shareholders agreement? What's your, when you fall out, what's going to happen? What's your business equivalent of a prenup? They went, we haven't got one, but we're best friends, been best friends since school, and blah, blah, blah. And I go, yeah, great, perfect. So let's get this done. Now, it took me about 9 months of badgering them before eventually they did it, thankfully. And it was about month 11, I think, actually it might have been a bit later than that it all kicked off. And Steve got up to naughty behaviours, and what that meant was they were able to separate amicably. Now, for speed and easy maths, I felt the company, because it was very stable, without going into the details now, was worth about a 5 times multiple. So it was worth about 2 million quid, I would feel, on the open market. And they had an agreement whereby if one offers to buy the other out, the other can either match the price and buy the person making the offer out, or they're forced out. Okay, so if Royce and I are business partners, I say, Royce, I'm going to buy you out, I'm valuing the company at £1 million quid, so I'm going to give you $500,000. He's either got to accept it or give me $500,000 and buy me out. That was a very high speed how it was structured. And because they had this safety net in place, technically you could argue the company was worth £2 million quid, but under stress and under the risk of litigation, the threats, the company was liable for the fact that a director had slept with and shared drugs with, A-class drugs, with more than one employee, junior, young female employee, which is a nightmare, that they agreed to meet in the middle. Because theoretically, Mike could have forced Steve out and just said, no, I'm going to report you to the police, I'm going to force you out, and it could have been very nasty. And in doing so, he might not have had to pay Steve a penny. But the business would have got destroyed, and it would have got nasty. So instead, they met in the middle. It was almost exactly in the middle, with a £1 million valuation, for a few other caveats, but which in effect meant for Steve, he got 50% of that, which Mike paid him out of the profit of the business, because the business can now afford to do it over time, which meant Steve could leave with his head held high, and Mike effectively bought a £2 million house for £1 million. So I share that story for two reasons. One is, you've got to do analysis on the numbers. It can be staring you in the face. I instinctively thought this might be the case when I asked a lot of questions, but it just proved to be an extreme example. That there was a hidden asset called a load of money that was being made in this business, and actually by doing less, they were going to make a lot more. That's point one. Point number two is risk mitigation. It's also an acquisition story, right? Now, Mike wouldn't have had it be this way. If he could ride the clock, he would have rather have done it with his friend. And they're still friends, by the way, because they had it in place about what was going to happen if they fell out. And it meant they shook hands. Steve walked off with a big wedge of cash. Mike got a great, valuable business, the other half of the business, cheap. And then Steve asked Mike to be the best man at his wedding. Okay, so it all worked out because they had somebody who, I can't say the specifics, my situation was like that, who had the benefit of their experience saying, no, boys, let's get this agreement in place. Because the most likely thing to kill this business is you two falling out. And if you two are the kind of heads of the company and you fall out in a big way, the whole business is destroyed. So, at a conceptual level, I will leave case study number 2 on that point, other than to say, watch your ego. Watch your ego. Oftentimes people get into battles and it becomes stupid and they end up destroying. The analogies between a marital divorce and a business divorce are similar, but it can be, the same concept can be found with key employees. How can you make sure so that when these things do happen, that it's just a minor bump in the road in what otherwise would have destroyed a very, very lucrative, valuable business that they'd spent a decade building up. All right, I hope you enjoyed that part. Next up, I had a business that I wanted to sell, but I had a problem. The business was risky and it was too reliant upon me, right? Sound familiar? Well, in this 5th part, I'm going to tell you how I solved my problem to help me sell my business through mergers and acquisitions. That's buying other companies. Practical, simple, easy. Let's get to part 5. Case study number 3. So this is an interesting one. This is a far more positive, uplifting one. You'll be glad to know. So I had it was a hybrid company, but let's categorize it as a digital marketing agency. And I had built it to about $500,000 in revenue, and it was profitable. Going back, yes, it was something like this. But going back to maximizing the value of the business, I decided, this was kind of like 2012, 2013, that I wanted to sell this company. Because I had a few companies at the time and I wanted to sell one of them off to simplify my life. Because at one point I thought more is better, and then I realized actually I've got a hidden asset which can be capitalized on, and that will give me money to kind of secure my family, pay off my mortgage, which I think I had to, must have been 2012 or 11, and then I've got more money to invest in growth in what I believe to be the key companies that were really going to progress. So I went and sought out a mentor, because I went, okay, I want to sell a business, and in my head, I wanted to sell it for £1 million. Why did I come up with £1 million?
Because it was 7.
Because it's a big round number, right? So I went and I sought out a mentor. I paid him to be like a non-exec director. And so I paid him maybe 10, 12 grand, something like that, and said, help me prepare this company for exit. He said, Dan, you've got a big problem. The agency, I was running the agency. So he says, you're the biggest risk, you're the single point of failure. The company's not big enough for a start to get a multiple to make it worth the million that you want, but in addition, you're the single point of failure. So even if you got given an offer, Gaz, you're going to be asked to work in the company for a few years to hand it over, etc. And then therefore you're going to be working for somebody else, and inevitably you end up falling out and you end up getting a lot less money than you thought, kind of like Rob was talking about in that negotiation with the supplier. I said, well, how do I fix it? He goes, well, hire an MD. And I said, well, I don't want to do that, and I'll take out the profit. And he went, yeah, don't go and hire an MD. That would be stupid. He said, plus you probably can't find one. He goes, the best MD is probably already running another business. He's probably running a competitive business. He goes, if you want to sell your company, go and make a list of all your competitors and buy them. And that's what I did. So I made a list of all the competitors in my industry, who I knew, who I didn't know, and I started to go out and have conversations about whether or not they'd be interested in being bought out, or whether they would buy me out, or whether we could merge together. And the first company that I found was of a similar size, and but by good luck as much as anything, his staff members were strong in the areas where my company was weak. So he had a good sales team back then. I didn't have a particularly good sales team. I had really good finances and numbers. His were a mess. I had a good marketer. He didn't. So on and so forth. So it was a natural fit. But what was even better was I got to give him a big promotion. Okay? I got to say, Neil, hey, you're running a £500,000 company. How would you like to be the MD of a £1 million company? He went, that sounds great. I went, brilliant. I'll be the FD, which is code word for not doing very much. 5 days a week. And so I got my ego out of the way, which allowed me to make an awful lot more money. Because then I had a much bigger company. And then all of a sudden I went, wow, I've doubled my company size overnight. Right? I doubled my company size, and there was some net cost savings between the two businesses. So it wasn't 50-50. I actually, because my business was more profitable, I ended up with a bigger share than 50-50. But let's pretend it was 50-50. My 50% is now making more profit than 100% of the old company pre-merger. Great, so we've got an increase in value. But in addition to that, I've fired myself, and I've got the right person for the job. How do I know? Because he was a pain in the ass as a competitor. Right? He was good. He was good. So I went, great, you run this ship. So it freed me up immensely. So I went from working 5 days a week.
Did you tell him you wanted to exit when you first spoke?
Yes, that was very much part of the pitch. Yeah, so very much part of the pitch was saying, hey, you want to exit? And he wanted a big figure like I want a big figure. And I said, well, we can't get there on our own. We're more likely to get there together, but actually, we can grow it more quickly together. And therefore, I'll figure out how to sell us. So I became full-time FD Biz Development, which was about 2 days a week worth of work. So in effect, I'm getting more money, but I'm doing half as many hours, because I did have primarily one other company or two other company interests at that time. Okay, so and then all of a sudden I went, well, why would you stop there? Because in this case with Neil, it was a very good marketing sales operation. Okay, great, but operationally, fulfillment-wise, it could be better. So we went and found somebody else who was a bit smaller, who was a really good fulfillment delivery person, and went, Adam, hey, you're in a six-figure business and there's all that horrible marketing selling stuff. You hate that stuff. We love it. We can give you more fulfillment to you than you can shake a stick at. We've got a lot more resources. Join the team. And he had a few 100,000 in turnover, and we said, well, how do we do it? And we went, great, how much money are you taking from your business at the moment? And he went, X. I don't remember the number. I'd say it was $5,000 a month. Went, great, we'll match it, and we'll give you bonuses, and we'll take all that endless hassle off your plate. Because in the analysis, we realized that there were savings to be made, which meant he could keep taking what he was taking, There was more to be had, but in addition, not only was there more profit left over, but it strengthened the business because now there was a bigger team. We could cherry pick the best employees. We actually kept all of them, as I recall, which in hindsight was a mistake, but there you go. You could have cherry picked the best employees and you've got a more reliable, predictable and sustainable business. Okay. So I bought these companies and I put them together. The key, so what was the hidden asset? The hidden asset was people. There were people in these companies that could be better utilized in a bigger organization. So I was able to see actually putting these pieces together would provide a net benefit to shareholders. Okay, good. You've just got to have the ability to work the relationship so you can make it truly a win-win. And then we took that combined entity and we sold it contractually. I can't tell you who we sold it to, but it's a tech company that's, well, it's kind of a business social network. And we sold that entity. I actually sold it twice, but that's more than we've got time for today. I sold it once, bought it back, and then later sold it again to a publicly listed tech company for, well, actually, yeah. It was multi seven figures. And even though it wasn't 100% mine, the majority was. So it was a 7-figure exit. And the reason why it sold is because this agency had massive market penetration in the UK that this US firm wanted. They wanted penetration to the UK. They tried to do it in the UK themselves and then failed. And they went, what do we have? We've got an asset called we're listed on the stock market. Which, by the way, an easy way to increase your multiple is to list in the stock market. It's not easy, but it does increase your multiple. Why? Why does being listed on the stock market increase your company's valuation? A company on the stock market will have a higher valuation than a company not on the stock market.
It's kind of better accounts and probably more public accountability. So
Maybe, but that's not the driver. If it's on the stock market, what does it mean? If something's traded on the stock market, it means
it's more liquid for a start.
it means you're more liquid. So in a share, because let's say you've got a company with $1 million in profit. If you're a privately held company and you're a minority shareholder, there'll be all kinds of restrictions. You can't sell. You've got to wait for the dividends to be issued, etc. In a public company, you can just sell your shares on the open market, which means the company's more liquid. And if a company's more liquid, it's easier to get investors in, and it's also safer for them because they can get out quicker. So the same company, generally speaking, the same company, private versus public, will have a higher valuation if it's on the public market. If you're a real skeptic, you'd say that's because private investors tend to be much more shrewd than the general public. So that if a VC fund is buying a company with all their own money, they'll pay a lower price than 1,000 Joe Publics who would say, oh, I want a little piece of that company. Because it's bigger risk for the VC to use all their money to buy it in one transaction and harder for them to get it out, and they're more shrewd and educated. So they'll drive a harder bargain than 1,000 Joe Publics each buying 1,000th or 100,000th of a company. Does that make sense? So, ended up exiting that. So that was a sort of growth through acquisition. Of course, there's loads of details, but conceptually you're saying, okay, where's the leverage point? There are people who are my biggest enemies by way of competition, and actually, they're really skilled. If they work for me, we'd do great. How do we make it work? I'm fine with hiring key employees, but if you've got to poach them away, that can be time and expensive. And I actually went, well, hold on, don't poach them away. I'll figure out a way to have them get more benefits, but it's truly a win-win. Okay? That's an acquisition strategy. So, checking my notes. Oh yeah, and so consequently, effectively, even though I wasn't the MD, I was a majority shareholder, which meant I kind of called the shots. Not kind of, I did. But you've got to manage the relationships. But that's why it was easy, because this company, over this time period, grew to 5 million-ish in revenue in a couple of years. Because we had all the pieces of the puzzle. We had a great marketing sales team, we had a great fulfillment team, and I had the time and the headspace to make sure we were making the strategic right moves and finding future alliances and partnerships, whether it be acquisitions or whether it just be strategic partnerships, that drove the business forward. I stayed in my strength, and I've got other people that were more skilled than I was to do the rest. Problem with your ego, or mine at least, is I think I can do it better. But then when I'm trying to do 10 jobs, I can't do it better anyway, but I'm actually lying to myself. Somebody can do it better than I can. And why the hell would you do a £30,000 a year job if you can hire somebody to do it and you can go and do a job that allows you to add a multiple six-figure amount of money to the company's value every year? To my mind, that would seem to be a much better use of time. If you like that last part, this next part 6, in the series of Business Value Maximisation, you're going to love. I'm going to talk about how I took a gym from a multi-six-figure revenues but low, £20,000 in profit and negative cash flow, to I almost trebled the profit and moved the cash flow to £73,000 in the right direction with the identical same revenue in just 1 year. Look, said a different way, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. Find out what it really means. Find out how to 6x your profit in this part. So, you know this phrase, but just to complete it, just to drive it home, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. So most people have heard the expression, but what does it really mean? I'm about to give you a real life example. So everyone comes in. If you want to know how to grow your business, just look at what most business owners do and do the exact opposite. Most business owners immediately go, how do I grow my sales? And to my mind, that's kind of employee job level thinking. I think if you want to have a better business, be a better business owner. So I think you need to think like a shareholder, and a sophisticated shareholder at that. So let's walk through an example of a gym that I purchased. There's quite a few gym owners today. That's because I've had a little bit of experience in the industry. So I've simplified this maths, but I'll try not to get in the detail. In fact, in the interest of time, I can't get into detail. Just try and get it at a conceptual level. Okay? So this is a gym that had a load of self-employed trainers. So it had 400,000 in revenue. It had cost of goods, the cost of all the trainers, etc., of £160,000, which is 40% of the revenue. That make sense? The overhead of running this place, the rent, the rates, all the rest of it was, admin staff was 220,000. Therefore, there was profit of £20,000. However, the owner was mega stressed. Why was he mega stressed? Because I used to train in this gym, okay? And he was mega stressed because I've been to the accountant, Dan, and he's told me that I've got to pay a corporation tax bill. I said, well, did you make the profit? He went, no. I said, well, why are you going to pay a corporation tax bill? He goes, I don't understand. I said, show me your accounts. So he showed me his accounts, his accountant had prepared, and he had made a £20,000 in profit. And he goes, no, I haven't. I said, well, that's what your accountants say. And he goes, well, I haven't. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I haven't had any money from this business all year, and I've actually had to put in £10,000. And he goes, I don't understand. And I do, because profit and cash aren't the same. So, don't worry if you're not financially inclined, just go with the concept. So the fact was, at the year end, compared to his balance sheet, he'd made the profit. Where was it hiding? Okay? And his receivables, the money that was owed to him, was £15,000 higher at year end than at the start of the year. Which meant that £15,000 of that money, £15,000 of that profit was in somebody else's bank account. He delivered the service and it was owed to him, but he didn't have it in cash. Does that make sense? Did you follow on? Okay. In addition to that, the payables, the money that he owed to suppliers, etc., was £10,000 less at the end of this year than it was at the end of the previous year. Which meant he caught up on some bills and some debt that he had, and he paid it off. So he owed £10,000 less out to other people. Which is where another £10,000 has gone. But he'd also bought a stock, because you know what happened, Mark? He'd had a great idea. He said, we've got all these clients that buy supplements. If I make my own supplements, they'll buy it and I'll make the margin. So he'd gone, but he had to do a minimum order, and he had all this stock, which promptly nobody bought. So he had 5,000 tied up in stock. So basically £15,000 worth for cash, £10,000 worth for cash, that's 25, plus another 5, that's £30,000 worth for cash, where it had gone. He only had 20 on paper, so 20 minus 30 is minus 10. In other words, the bank balance at the year end, Lee, would have been £10,000 worse than it was at the start of the year. But at the start of the year it was 0, and he didn't have an overdraft. So how did he make ends meet? He put 10 grand in. And yet the accountant's saying, hey, you owe 4 grand, just under £3,800 in corporation tax. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. Because he'd grown this thing, he'd grown this business. But actually he was cash flow negative. He was in deep trouble. So we figured something out. So I'll do this at speed now. So I got involved at this point. Okay? I got involved at this point because I said, where's the hidden asset? This business was great from a customer perspective. I was a customer. You know what? They gave a great service and it was a great gym. Great gym. Great service. And when there's money to be made here, what's the leverage point? And the leverage point is he had no frigging clue. His name was Oliver. He had no frigging clue when it came to the numbers. Okay? He had no clue when it came to the numbers whatsoever. And I went, you know what? I can fix this. Okay? Here's what happened. The next year, the revenue stayed exactly the same. Because, by the way, I became a 50% partner in this gym. And Oliver went, hey, let's grow revenue. I went, how are you planning on doing that? He goes, well, you're going to put in this money, and then I'm going to open another location. And I said, not a chance in hell. I said, if you just do what you're told, okay, we're going to be good. And fortunately, he was in enough pain and enough financial hardship that he kind of had to go with it. And I had enough rapport because I'd known him for a while. So the next year, it was roughly identical revenue. However, we reduced the costs from 40% to 36%. And that was because there was a member of staff that was basically a pain in the ass, that was overpaid and not very good. We encouraged him to seek employment elsewhere. And we got replacement people that were cheaper but provided great value for money. Okay? All of whom are still there, actually. Even though this was 7 years ago. I have a belief, which I think all of you should leave here with. I've yet to find a business that I've invested in or that's come onto the mastermind program that I can't find 10% of the expenses saved. And in this case, it was 11%. So we saved 22 grand off the overhead. Where was that? It was everywhere. It was everything you can possibly imagine. It was negotiating with the landlord. It was getting the rates reevaluated. It was going in utility suppliers. It was changing the cleaning company. I'm not always saying just cut out costs and don't spend money. But I am saying every pound the company spends is an investment, right? It's an investment and they expect a return. And not all the investments you are making are equal. So how can we get a better return on investment for that money being spent? So all of a sudden now, from the same 400,000 in revenue, we've gone from 20 in profit to 58 in profit. Trebled profitability. It's pretty good. I think that's pretty worthwhile, especially without any revenue increase. Half expecting a round of applause, but whatever, it's fine. It's fine. I know you just have to lunch. You're about 20 minutes away from getting coffee, so don't worry. But that wasn't where the real magic happens. That was the fundamentals. However, pretty much all I'd done was coach him. So I spent about an hour a fortnight telling Oliver, discussing the numbers with him, the financial accounts. That was it. And we'd agreed what he'd do and then he'd do it. Or he wouldn't do it and then next time I'd get really grumpy and then he'd do it. It was pretty much how it went for a year. But we got on top of the receivables. In other words, we made 58 in profit. However, we collected in some of this money that was owed to us. We got better lines of credit from some of the suppliers to extend that out. And we got rid of that stock. We sold it off the cost. It was just a bad idea. And he still insists it's a good idea. And maybe it was, just at a different time. We didn't have the bandwidth to take this on. So effectively, we got 58 in profit. However, we did better than that because we got an extra 5 grand here, an extra 5 grand here, an extra 5 grand here. So 58 plus 15 equals 73. Okay, so we turned £58,000 in profit into £73,000 in cash. Everybody with me? Kind of conceptually? which means the difference between this year and this year is an £83,000 swing in cash terms. Okay? But from the outside, you'd have no clue. You'd have the same business, same damn business.
And you got free personal training.
Oh, 100%, 100%, yeah. I had to look the part. I was 20 stone before I worked for this one. So that was that year. And then it took that long to get it in shape, even though it wasn't hard. It was 2 hours a week. Excuse me, no it wasn't. It was 2 hours a month, an hour a fortnight for me. He worked as many hours as he had been doing. It's just that we managed to leverage them more often to the staff, and he did more of the strategic things. He was a control freak. He still is, bless him. We're still friends, and he's still a control freak, but less so. But then finally we were in a position, because if it had been left to him, the bank balance never would have gotten this high. But fortunately, I didn't need the money, and I refused to let him spend it, because my caveat was, good, I control the bank. That's basically my only rule. I control the bank account. We'll discuss everything, and we'll agree it between us, but I'm controlling the bank account. And that's non-negotiable, because I'm not in favour of letting an alcoholic work behind a bar. Okay? And year one performance, that's what he's not yet developed the competency to handle cash. Okay? So you've got to train the skill. So in the next year, so this is year 2 of my involvement, we were able to, it was actually slightly under, I think, 500,000, but I've rounded it to make the maths easy. So we did get the sales up by about 20%. Okay, got the sales up by about 20%. We kept the costs the same ratio. So COGS went up in terms of money paid out, but as a ratio it stayed the same. We couldn't get it much leaner. Trust me, it was tight. Okay, we had 198 of overhead, therefore 122 in profit, and we made further improvements and refinements to the cash management on the balance sheet, which meant 122 became 137. Okay, which the difference between this year and this year is £147,000 swing. Okay, and if you want to get really finicky about it, you'd say, okay, 73 plus 137 is 210, plus that's 220. So there was £220,000 in cash terms. This business was better off in 2 years. 2 years. Okay. Where was the hidden asset? Well, the hidden asset was actually the core business was solid. The hidden asset was in my head. I could see with a few little tweaks the leverage point, if he could just get the financial controls in place, which was actually about taking away him doing stupid stuff whenever he had any money, would allow this business to flourish. It's 2 hours a week. But that was the difference in the value. So now in your head you should be saying you're not getting an external shareholder, you're the one making the changes and being more financially literate. To make it more exciting, what happens to the multiple on this business? This business is, the profit is obviously radically increased, it's gone up 6-fold, but the multiple's increased because you know what we managed to do over these 2 years? Make it so that Oliver went from 40 hours on the gym floor, right, like head PT, to doing 10, 12, basically doing his favourite clients. And at this point what happened was we had disagreements about, what to do with the money, basically. So he bought me back out, not dissimilar than Mike and Steve, but in a much more amicable way and without any drugs or women involved whatsoever. He bought me back out, but he bought me out at a fair value that we predetermined because the formula was still the case and the business had the cash. And now, interestingly, he retired to Dubai and ran the business from a distance. But what do you think happened over the 3 years? I think this is 3 years ago now. What's happened in the 3 years since then?
Lost money.
Business has basically gone back here.
Yeah, back to year one.
And I've been chatting about trying to buy, but he's not going to sell it. You know why? Because his ego can't take the hit, and he's chasing it all the way down. And it might not fail because he is smarter. He has gotten smarter, but the difference, and why I say to you guys, I'm not saying you have to do all this stuff yourself, but you need to be willing to learn it, is I did a lot of it for him. Right? I had the controls in place. He didn't have to get the financial discipline. I just took the bank account off him. So when the bank account went back, and over time he lost that discipline, even though intellectually he understood it, the business regressed. If the effect is missing, called the profit that you want and the cash flow, so is the cause. So I believe that he stopped doing the right causes, and therefore the effect, there's a lag time. Equally, there's a lag time. You've got to do the right things. You know, people might say, well, why are mastermind members still with you 2, 3, 4 years later? And it's either because they still feel they can progress further, right? And there's a lag time. Oftentimes, like Rob, year 2, Alexis, 4 years in, you know, so on and so forth. Paul, 2 years in. The story I told you, Mike and Steve, 3 years in, I think. Because they get traction, but then when you get bigger quality problems. When you put in an MD, when you open up another location, problems get more complicated. Here's the key takeaway, I believe. The key takeaway is you need to be investing in yourself. You need to be developing the most important asset. Running the business doesn't mean you have to day-to-day be involved. But that's where all the leverage is. Thinking like a shareholder, thinking strategically. That's what Oliver was missing. He could have learned it himself, but he might not have done. And therefore he would have stayed stuck. And at some point, I dare say, he would have thrown in the towel. Metaphorically, even if you're making money right now, if you think this is where your business is, it's the skills is what's going to take you to 6x, 10x, etc. in value. Originally, I only planned to do 6 parts in this Business Value Maximisation series, but I'm going to throw in a bonus one. Okay, this bonus video, I'm going to show you how I use my particular strengths and skill sets to find an opportunity which resulted in multi-6 figures net profit to me from consulting for just one client. Okay, so this business was paying me more than it was paying its CEO. And in this video, I'll explain why they felt it was worth every single penny to them. This isn't about me bragging about how much I got paid from a single client or about how much I made adding millions upon millions to their revenues and to their valuation. It's about how you can do the same process, how you can identify these opportunities, either go and consult for somebody else or identify the opportunities in your own business and leverage them to create significant growth. Okay, so final story, which in many ways I'm now going down in revenue size, but this will illustrate a different point. So back in 2010, 2011, I created a 6-figure net profit business almost overnight in consulting with one client. So I found a company who I'd known over years. I'd used their particular software, and it was being marketed terribly. And even though, as I was complimented by somebody said this to me at lunch, that primarily in the work that we do here, we're not anti-marketing, but we're more heavily weighted towards KPIs, metric, people issues, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are saying, oh, marketing's the be-all and end-all of fixing your business. And it's bollocks. It's a piece of a very complicated puzzle, and anybody that tells you otherwise is trying to sell you their marketing stuff. Okay, it's useful, but often people go and buy it when it's not the real issue. You know, they are diagnosing themselves without a proper, or they're prescribing what to do without a proper diagnosis of what's going on in your business. I'm much more in favour of a holistic look and analysing numbers. But my background back then was much more heavily weighted towards marketing, and this company's marketing was poor. And I created rapport with one of the company owners, and at the time their revenue was about 13 million, something like that. It was about 13 million, and I was able to have a good chat with them. And it was a long chat, it took about 5 days, which they paid me for, to talk about their business. They paid me to do a consultation. And it was in the US, so I flew over there, did the work. And then by the end of that 5 days, they were convinced that I was the missing piece for this puzzle to make it work. So I got them to put me on a £16,000 a month retainer for 2 days a week Not that it was actually dependent upon the time, it was just £16,000 a month, and I'd allocated 2 days a week of my time in order to do it. That company added 7 million to the top line, but it was software. I didn't have their P&L, so it was top line revenue, but it's software, so most of that must have been GP in that 12-month window. And I remember because the part of the conversation was that one of the co-owners who I negotiated with said, "Oh, Dan, do you mind sending your invoice in like every 2 weeks?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, the problem is with that invoice amount, you're actually getting paid more than our CEO." So he said, "Can you break it into 2 invoices a month?" And I went, "That's not a problem. I'm sure I can make that happen." But when I tell people that story, they go, "Oh my God, like, how do you justify that?" Because it wasn't contingent. They were paying that fee regardless of the results that had been gained. So a few reasons I tell this story. One is, there may be a much more lucrative opportunity right in front of you than you realise right now for your business. It just sometimes takes what is your hidden asset. And for me back then, I was very skilled at understanding how to create marketing systems. And I had the strength that fitted their weakness perfectly. And I was able to observe it, I was able to go in and have a dialogue, and I was able to show them that I could help them solve that problem. And the money that they paid, if you look at it in isolation, oh my God, that's an enormous amount of money. You're getting paid more than the CEO of a company that was a company that's doing 50 million or whatever they were in sterling equivalent, about 15 million, 16 million. At that time, you're getting paid more than them. And it's like, yes, but it gave them the value that they wanted. And subsequently, about a year in, they said, "Hey, can we change it? Because this is a bit pricey. Can we change it and make it incentive-based rather than a flat fee?" I went, "Yeah, what do you have in mind?" And they basically tied to results in both cash and in stock. And over the next 2 years, they paid me a 7-figure sum. And I'm a shareholder in a company. And you kind of go, wow, that's great, but oh my God, how do you know if it's too much? Because it's got to be representative of the value that's added. And in that time period, they got past $100 million, so they got maybe 60, 70 million in revenue. And the marketing system I created for them at that time was the most efficient marketing machine that they'd ever had in the company's, at that point, 8-10 year history. And I believe they still have it now. It's been surpassed in many ways and improved upon. But the point was, what is your hidden asset? I had knowledge in my head which enabled them to solve a problem and get to where they wanted to go much more quickly. I put it to you that you have knowledge in your head which is going to allow you to get to, you want to go much more quickly. The question is, where does that knowledge need to be applied? How do you set up the game? It's probably not going back and maintaining, status quo. I think most people get stuck because they get stuck operationally in the business. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm operational in this business right now. Okay, there's a time and a place, but it's not where the money is made. Just ask Oliver. Right? The money wasn't getting made in the 40 hours a week he was doing on the gym floor. The money was getting made in the 4 to 5 hours per week that we reallocated his time onto the stuff that I was able to see. We need to fix this. You make £1,000 a month saving here, that's 12 grand on the bottom line this year. Simultaneously making the business more stable, you go from a 3 to a 4 times multiple, that £12,000 saving is worth 48 grand when we exit. Alright. But actually that saving was probably a tough conversation letting somebody go. It was probably an hour conversation, but people get distracted, they get caught up, and they don't take the time to be out of the business and work on the business. So, a few key takeaways. Yeah, 3 points. Number 1, I think you should raise your thinking. It's good to get down in the weeds sometime and know the nitty gritty, but you need to raise your thinking. Ultimately, if you want to have a better business, become a better business owner. Get around smart business owners and raise the quality and caliber of your thinking, make better decisions. Number 2, develop the most important asset in your business. What is the most important asset in your business? You. As in, I'm a fan of developing all you people, but if you're the highest paid person in your company, you know what? I'm in favor of developing you the most. Okay? And number 3, 2 questions asked at the start. Where's the hidden asset and where's the leverage? And the leverage is going to be based upon strategically what you decide to do. You can pay somebody a salary to do the doing in a lot of cases, or maybe you do need to do it yourself. But the value between year 1 and year 3 in Ollie's business, putting money in the business versus having 6 figures net profit, was a couple of small strategic applications. It wasn't working harder. Okay? So, they're the 3 key takeaways. If you like what you've heard so far, you want to find out more about our upcoming skills training session on business value maximization coming up later this month. And if you want to find out about that special day, diving into this stuff in depth, you need to email Gabriella at danbradbury.com. She'll give you the dates, the prices, and if there are any places left available. So contact Gabriella at danbradbury.com for more information about the upcoming Business Value Maximization Day. I hope you enjoyed that episode. 3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 Steps to Improving Your Profits and Cash Flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.